Okay, yeah, this is the appropriate amount of ridiculousness. Oh my god.
This is
God, I look
incredible.
like Elphaba right now.
All right, everybody, and welcome back. As always, I am your party host, Joe Rivera, and along with me, as always, is one of the preeminent bald knowers at USA Today Sports. You know him as Jacob Camenker. We know him as Vod Roddy. And Jacob, it's Christmas week, my friend. Let's get some fantasy managers some presents. How you feeling? How you feeling? It's championship week. It's Christmas week. What are the vibes in the Camenker estate?
Well, the vibes are pretty high. You know, we like the holiday season. The vibes are not as high for myself and my father's fantasy teams. My father had a record number of points dropped on him last week, about 5 touchdowns from Brock Purdy and several others. So we're trying to overcome that right now, Joe. But I got to say, I'm going to take credit for this. We were able to lead our producer, Madison, here to
There
a
we
fantasy
go.
title this year. She did a great job of pretty religiously following my advice, which is something that I didn't even do this year. So shout out to Madison for making it to her fantasy championship. And shout out to all fantasy managers out there who made it to the ship. It's not easy to do. A lot of tough start and sitting decisions and all these quarterback injuries, man. It's made a big difference around the league. So if you got this far, congratulations. Let's go out and win a title.
Absolutely. And yeah, shout out Madison for everything she's done for this podcast throughout the season. Woman behind the glass. Greatly appreciate her. And hopefully she brings it home for the NFL Fantasy Vodcast here at USA Today. But before we get into fantasy, Jacob, I just want to talk a little bit reality with, it's all about accountability, right? And I have a lot of headwear today. If you notice, I can't really put this on my head, but I want to start with a second and wrong real quick. Philip Rivers, I owe you an apology. I was unfamiliar with your game, right? On the other half of this podcast that we do with Chris Boombaka, which you can find on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, I recently said how much I hate the Philip Rivers story, top to bottom. It seemed ridiculous to me to expect this guy to come off the couch after 5 years of not playing. And you know what? I got to give him credit, man. He's played really well, surprisingly well. Facing a tough 49ers defense, he finishes the game 23 of 35 yesterday, 277 yards, 2 touchdowns, a late interception. I mean, that's better than I think anybody could have expected. Now, is there a larger conversation to be had around quarterbacks in the NFL and the indictment of quarterback play? Or are we just playing bad football players, like I saw someone say on Twitter today? I'm not sure, but that's a big time performance in week 16 for a guy who I think nobody really expected from. So, Philip Rivers, I was second and wrong, my friend. I hope you continue bowling out for all the old dudes out there. But Jacob, any thoughts on Rivers and the way that he's performed?
Yeah, I think Rivers' success in his role, having been retired nearly 5 years, just a reminder that the NFL quarterback position is often a mental game. The guys who can process the field and read it well are always going to be able to have success, even when their arm strength really isn't there anymore. I mean, Philip Rivers at the first end of his career, didn't have the biggest arm in the world. Now, 5 years later, it's a little bit weaker than even it was then, but he still has been able to place the ball where it needs to go. And he finds the open receiver pretty much every time, Joe. And I think it's just a reminder that processing the field is the most important thing for quarterbacks. We see a lot of young guys struggle to do that, even when they have those tantalizing tools like big arms and mobility. So I think you're going to see hopefully a shift in the NFL in future years where there's a big time emphasis placed on that mental development early on so that we can have more performances like Philip Rivers. But, Rivers is he's a potential Hall of Famer. He's got that accuracy. He's got that field reading ability. So I'm surprised as to how he's performed just from a physical standpoint, but I guess it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, right? He's always been really one of the smarter quarterbacks in the league and one of the ones who can actually just find the open man every time.
All right, Jacob. So we talked about Philip Rivers, and let's bring some fantasy championships to people out there. Let's talk about your must-start players of the week. And Baker Mayfield is the first quarterback here on your must-start players. Why does Mayfield make your list?
Yeah, so I know there's going to be some concern about Mayfield. He's only thrown 1 passing touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games, but his matchup against the Dolphins is a prime bounce back spot, Joe. Dolphins have surrendered the 10th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this year. And over the last 2 weeks, they've allowed an average of 251.5 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns to the quarterbacks they've faced. Granted, one of those came against Joe Burrow last week, so maybe Mayfield doesn't have quite as high a ceiling as Burrow, but the point remains the Dolphins Their defense hasn't performed well. They're out of the playoff hunt now, and the Buccaneers, Joe, are going to be desperate to win this game. If they lose and the Panthers somehow beat the Seattle Seahawks, Buccaneers are out of playoff contention. I think the Buccaneers are going to try to reverse this losing skid they've had and really rely on Baker to carry them. I think they might try to run up the score just to make sure that they don't somehow blow this one. So I'm expecting Mayfield to get maybe 250 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think this is going to be a nice bounce back spot for him. So maybe not the most trustworthy quarterback the last few weeks, but I think you can ride with him in this championship game.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jacob. This is one of those situations where I think the reality of the NFL and where teams are really seeps into the fantasy world more than it does maybe during a week 6 or 7, right? The Buccaneers are desperate right now. They need to do something, right? Losing to Carolina in week 16 was pretty ugly, especially after Todd Bowles went on his rant. So look for Baker Mayfield to have a big game. I think that that's a safe bet if you're looking to win a fantasy championship. Moving down the list, Jacob, Ramondre Stevenson, your guy, Ramondre Stevenson, facing a Jets defense, which we don't have to get into that, but he makes a must start this week. Explain to us why, for those who are unaware of how bad the Jets are, why Stevenson makes this list.
Yeah, so I'll give you the one stat on the Jets that, you could start any running back
Just
against
one?
them.
Just one stat? Yeah,
There's
yes,
more than
continue.
one. There's a lot more than one, but we'll give you the one key one. They've surrendered a league high 23 total touchdowns to running backs. So you're always going to want to back the running back going against the Jets. Now, this week, Stevenson might be in for a huge workload because the Patriots lost star rookie Travion Henderson to a head injury on Sunday Night Football. We don't know if he's going to be able to come back this week. I'm assuming he's in the NFL's concussion protocol. I haven't heard otherwise yet. But if he can't play, Stevenson's going to be in line for that big workload. No other player on the roster currently has more than 4 carries besides Henderson and Stevenson. So Dearness Johnson, he could mix into the rotation a little bit, but it's more likely that Stevenson will be treated as a true lead back, get maybe close to 20 touches. And against this really bad Jets run defense, that could end up being a game where he goes for over 100 yards and a couple touchdowns. So I'm sorry to do this to you, Joe, but we got to fade your Jets here. They're going to let Brady cook. And hey, maybe you'll end up getting the number 1 pick in the upcoming NFL draft if all breaks well for you.
All I want for Christmas is a winning football team. Santa hasn't shown up for me for the last 15 years, but, I know he's very busy. So it is what it is. All right, Jacob, last but not least on your must-start list this week, Trevor Lawrence has been on a heater, but it's one of his wide receivers who you have this week is a must-start. Why don't you tell the people who's the last player on your must-start this week?
Yeah, it's going to be Parker Washington from the Jaguars. Now, I know Jacoby Myers and Brian Thomas Jr. are probably ahead of him in the pecking order, so you look at Washington, you might say to yourself, oh, that guy's a little bit of a boomer bust in this situation, right? At the same time, he just racked up 145 receiving yards on 6 catches against the stalwart Broncos defense, and he led the team with 10 targets in that game. He has shown good chemistry with Trevor Lawrence throughout the year. I think in recent weeks, he's sort of taken a backseat to Myers as Lawrence has tried to improve his chemistry with him. But man, you hit the nail on the head there too. Lawrence has just been red hot lately. He's been completely unstoppable. And we just saw what the Colts did or couldn't do against the 49ers on Monday Night Football. They let Brock Purdy throw for a career high 5 touchdown passes, offered pretty much no resistance in the secondary. They're without Sauce Gardner. They're without Charvarius Ward. So their cornerback room is really, really thin. So I just don't trust them to be able to contain the Jaguars. I would trust all 3 of those receivers, Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., and Washington, as anything from a wide receiver 2 to a flex play this week. I think all of them have great upside. And as long as the Jaguars are looking this good, I'm going to be riding with them, Joe. They might have a legitimate shot to go on a run in the AFC playoffs.
All right, Jacob, we know that the risks you take might not be worth the reward. So let's talk about some players that you feel cannot see the field in fantasy lineups this week. Let's talk about your must-sit players. And a little bit surprising to me, maybe this has more to do with the opponent, but Justin Herbert makes your must-sit list this week.
Yeah, I know it's going to be hard to sit Herbert, Joe, based off what he did against the Cowboys in Week 16. I think he had 300 passing yards and 3 total touchdowns. But look, the Cowboys are a lot different than the Texans. Houston has allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season. I believe the Cowboys have allowed the most. So you're talking about flipping a matchup basically on its head. Herbert's going to have to find a way to succeed against the defense They're ranked number 1 in EPA per play this season for the NFL's next-gen stats. So they just don't allow a lot to happen, especially through the air. It's easier to attack them on the ground. That's what we saw a little bit last week with Ashton Genty. The Texans tend to be worse against running backs. So I'm looking at this as a game where the Chargers might try to get Omarion Hampton going. And look, despite last week's 3-touchdown performance, Herbert still has just 8 total touchdowns over his last 6 games. He's been battling that wrist injury, so I'm just not expecting a huge game out of him. Now, if you don't have any other quality options at quarterback, you can stick with Herbert. I know it's hard amid all the injuries in the league. The streamer ranks have been thinned. But if you have a decent alternative, I would consider backing it because I just don't think that Herbert's going to have that kind of explosive week that you'd like to have to clinch a fantasy championship.
Yeah, especially against the Texans defense, which I think we both agree is championship caliber right now with the way that they're playing. So don't start Justin Herbert. In fact, avoid him entirely this week. All right, Michael Wilson, wide receiver for the Cardinals. Make sure players to avoid this week, Jacob. A little surprising to see Michael Wilson here in your must-sit list, but tell me why he doesn't make this list.
Yeah, so Michael Wilson's production without Marvin Harrison Jr. in the lineup has been excellent. When Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play, it's averaging 10.25 catches for 124.74 yards per game. It has 3 total touchdowns in those 4 games. Now, in the other 11 games that he's played with Marvin Harrison Jr., Wilson's averaging just 2.9 catches for 29 yards and has 2 total touchdowns. So you're talking about a guy who has unbelievably strong splits depending on what MHJ does. And we saw Harrison Jr. play last week. Wilson kind of took a backseat to him. He caught a long touchdown pass. Pretty incredible catch, by the way. Did not think it was possible for him to reel that in based off where he was on the field, near the sideline, the ball almost hitting the ground. Managed to do it, but this just does not seem like a good spot for him if Harrison Jr. is going to play. And the Bengals, as bad as their defense has been against running backs, they've only allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to receivers this season. So I'm recommending benching Wilson. We'll see if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play. Maybe that'll change things.
All right, Jacob, last player on your must-sit list this week, Travis Kelce versus the Broncos. My friend, this is with, no Mahomes, no Gardner Minshew even. Chris Oladokun is going to have to throw to somebody, right? But what's your reasoning why Travis Kelce is a must-sit this week?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's Chris Oladokun is going to probably quarterback the team. If not, it'll be Shane Buechele. These are guys we're talking about as, hey, these are intriguing practice squad guys to develop. These aren't guys you want starting in an NFL game at this point in their careers, and let alone one against the Denver Broncos coming off of a loss. So I just have no interest in backing any member of the Chiefs. I would be sitting Isaiah Pacheco this week. I'd be sitting Xavier Worthy. And Travis Kelce, I do think they might try to force feed him a little bit to try to get him some catches. In the event that he retires this offseason, you'd like him to go out strong. But, man, the quarterback situation just is not worth chasing the points here, Joe. You got to go with the safer option at tight end. A safer option that could be someone like Taysom Hill, Joe, who got 12 carries last week and threw a touchdown. I'm going to die on that hill, pun intended here, and I'm going to recommend going with Taysom Hill over Travis Kelce.
All right, Cowboy. This is it. The women are laughing. The men are crying. The horses are barking. It's high noon, Big Take Jake. Last week, you said Michael Carter would go for over 100 scrimmage yards, and that didn't come to pass, my friend. Carter finished with just 65 scrimmage yards, but this is it, Big Take Jake. Your last shot. I won't say it's been an honor. It's been an experience. It's time for the 310 to Yuma, partner. What you got for us this week?
All right, partner. I've got one more shot before I gotta tell old Payne I'm leaving Cheyenne. Better make sure it's a rootin' tootin' bullseye, so we're gonna be back in Cam Ward to have a plumb terrific day. The upstart gunslinger is rounded into a nice form, logging 2 touchdowns in each of his last 3 games. We're back in the Buckaroo to get a career-high 3 total touchdowns and surpass that 260 passing yard mark. With that, I'll shut my big bazoo and see if we can ride into the sunset victorious at last.